Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
This week on Heroic Media, a new film captures one South Korean pastor's heroic defense of life.
British lawmakers vote in favor of three-parent in vitro fertilization.
And women's shelters band together in a unique anti-50 Shades of Grey initiative.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we explore news headlines that deal with very foundational moral issues relating to family and marriage and life.
Exactly, and we look at those because they're such foundational issues in our society.
Yes.
And those issues tend to revolve around abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Right. So what's our first story?
Thanks, Patrick. A pastor in South Korea has found an innovative solution to the huge number of abandoned orphans. He created a drop box to receive babies so that he could help them find homes.
Interesting idea. I think it was a good idea too. You know, there's just so many babies that it seems like that are being abandoned, and especially we're in his part of the country. And he came up. He was. Every human life is valuable. I think that's where we have to start. And so he thought, well, what can I do about this? How can I save some children out there, right? As opposed to them being, sometimes they're just left to die, sometimes they're aborted. So I think this is nice because it does give people an opportunity to know, hey, I could drop my baby off at this little drop box. And I think it's an interesting idea too. And like seeing pictures of the little drop box and seeing the baby inside there, it's just kind of mind-boggling, but it's great. I think it's definitely a heroic idea, to be able to do that and say, hey, listen, we'll take care of your baby if you don't want it. Just come here and drop this baby off in this box. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and he's saying that, he initially didn't think this would even work. He just wanted to try it.
Yeah.
And then a baby shows up in this box, and then another one and another one. And so he and his wife go ahead and they take them and they try to help find families for them who are willing to adopt them.
Yes.
And, in this area, there are a lot of babies who are abandoned. Many of them are physically or mentally handicapped.
Yep.
And so their parents either don't know how to take care of them or don't want to. And so they're generally just left to die. And in our country, more commonly they would be aborted. It's less likely that they would be abandoned, but they would be aborted. But either way, this does speak to the very fundamental dignity of human life. And this is actually not an isolated problem in South Korea. Around the world, there are more than 150 million orphans waiting for their forever family. So adoption is something that's really important.
It is.
We have talked about it on the show, but it's something that is worth mentioning, that if you feel called to adopt, it's something to look into, that there are many babies out there and many children who need a family and who are really looking for someone who will be able to love them and take care of them. So that's a really important aspect of this as well. Yeah,
and you can check out more at thedropboxfilm.com. It's really cool. I think that the idea of putting a video together about this really kind of brings out both kind of sides of the story. One is it kind of shows like, hey, this is how bad things are. And at the second, on the other side, it kind of shows a little bit of hope, right? Hope of how things can change. And just a reminder that every human life is worth love. And I think that that's one of the important things. And films like that, I think, are important to be able to kind of capture people's emotional state and get them tied into the problem so that people will become active in trying to combat this. And he says, he also says, I always pray that there will be no more abandoned babies in this country and no more in our baby box. That's all I want. So that's Pastor Lee, of course. And so I like that he also isn't just like, hey, this is the solution to the problem.
That's a good point.
It's kind of like an intermediate step to the solution to the problem. And I think that that's one of the key points in just what he said and in his work and what he's done.
Absolutely, I think that that's really key. That the solution here is not more baby boxes all over the place.
Exactly.
It's a culture that values human life.
Exactly.
And so I'm really glad that he mentions this point. And also you just kind of see his humility, that he's not doing this to get the limelight and to be the, in this movie. He's saying, I don't even want to have to do this. I just had to respond to these innocent human lives that were being, taken all around, and I had to do something about it. So it's a really inspiring story, and something that we should examine in our own country. What can we do? Maybe baby boxes wouldn't work because people tend not to leave abandoned babies, but what can we do in the same spirit of trying to encourage a culture of life and saying, okay, if you really are in a place where you don't feel like you can raise this baby, let me help, let me take care of the baby, let me help find someone, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, and I think that's part of being a Christian, right, is, acting out on those beliefs that we have as Christians, because if we don't act out on them, then we're not really behaving like Christians should. It's not just lip service. It's like you got to actually go out and do these things. So I think one of the toughest parts for me in doing this, and we, recently I was with some friends at church. We had a little men's group meeting, and we were trying to come up with creative ideas for the homeless. And I think that one of the things that I struggle with is like coming up with creative ways in our world today, like how we can address problems like this. So I think it's really great that this South Korean pastor came up with an idea like this.
Absolutely.
So. All right. For our next story, critics of three-parent embryos warn that the risks are yet to come. So in Britain, they've decided they've had an initial vote. And this initial vote is so that they can legalize three-parent embryos. Right? And so this initial vote, it was voted 382 to 128. And they approved this bill, and it was in the House of Commons, and it still needs to go to the House of Lords. Those numbers, 382 to 128 in favor, I think that's kind of, that was one of the things that stood out to me the most. I thought it maybe would be like kind of a narrow margin, but it was kind of a big gap.
It's very interesting.
So they approved two different types of three-parent in vitro, or three-parent children, basically, engineering children. And basically the thing that you really need to know is that, and the reason why the church objects it morally is the primary reason is because human embryos are destroyed in order to create another person.
Yeah, the church is opposed to this basically for the same reason that the church is opposed to two-parent in vitro fertilization. We're playing God, we're trying to create life. Normally there are two parents, there's the mother and the father, and that's where the genetic material comes from. In this case, if there's the mitochondria in the woman's egg is somehow damaged, they're taking that inserting donor mitochondria. So we're getting genetic information, DNA material from a separate person. But in addition to the moral concerns that the church raises, there's a lot of doctors and a lot of ethicists who are saying, wait a second, there's some very serious medical and ethical concerns here.
Exactly.
And one of the concerns is that this is from a doctor at the University of California, Davis. Since this is uncharted territory and the children born from this technology would have heritable genetic changes, there are also significant unknown risks to future generations. So basically, we don't know the implication. We're creating genetically modified humans, and we don't know the implication of it. This hasn't gone through adequate testing, and the children that are born are the guinea pigs. Without any consent, we're creating these human beings.
Exactly, and I think that was one of the biggest things that stood out to me. Aside from the moral implications, like even if you don't have Christianity as your background or the church to guide you on these types of issues, it's just the gravity of the situation. You can be really messing up a lot of things for a long time. Another person, Fiona Bruce, she's a member of Parliament. She said she voted against this. She said, but one thing is for sure, once this alteration has taken place, as someone has said, once the gene is out of the bottle, once these procedures that we're asked to authorize today go ahead, there will be no going back for society. So the problem is they don't know what is going to happen. There needs to basically be more scientific research so that they can determine, hey, at least on a scientific level, hey, there's going to be some major issues. They can foresee that there's going to be all sorts of problems, but they haven't even done a clinical trial on this, and so there's a lot of problems, right? And so the European Commission's 2001 directive says that it bars modifying a subject's germline, and so this is what that would do. Even if they do pass this, it would apparently violate another policy that's already in place. So who knows? Even if it does get passed, if it'll eventually, get shot down anyway. But you're really, like you said earlier, you're playing God, and you're doing a lot of crazy things that can affect a lot of human beings in unknown ways, cancer and
right.
you know, weird genetic mutations and just things that we don't know how things are going to interact, the
right.
mitochondria that's injected, things like that.
Right, there's fear of cancer in advanced aging, which could
right.
be, you know, a huge strain for these people. And you mentioned that it hasn't gone through adequate clinical trials.
Yeah.
Well, it's possible that they won't even be able to conduct those clinical trials because there could be some legal obstacles to doing that. Basically, because there are rules in the UK that ban trials on certain types of gene therapy.
Yeah, that
so
too.
as a society, they have said, we don't want these kind of trials being done on gene therapy.
Right.
This is a bad idea. And so now basically what they're asking the legislators to do is say, well, let's just go around that. Let's just ignore the fact that we as a society have decided that these kind of tests are not good. And let's just go, you know, skip the test and move forward with the technology.
Right.
So, you know, we'll see what happens when it comes to the House of Lords, but there's definitely some very serious ethical implications here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole reason that we're even talking about this in the first place is because people who are not able to have children for one reason or another, like the, you know, often cited is that there's some sort of mitochondrial problem with the woman's egg. You know, they want children so bad, which is a good desire to have children. But you know, there's a reason that God, you know, has that. The in vitro fertilization takes the, you know, the procreative act outside of marriage and puts it in, you know, a petri dish, right? And I mean, there's so many problems with this that we could talk about, but I think it's just, I mean, just at the scientific level is where I get stuck at, like especially at the beginning, and I don't understand how more. I wish I could be there when they were discussing all of this, because I mean, it's hard to find out a lot of information on this, and some of it's very scientific. But I would just want to ask those people that voted for it, like, what exactly that was presented persuaded you to vote yes? Because everything that I've seen on it, just from a scientific perspective, is like saying, no, don't do this. You could really mess some stuff up. There's already all these other laws in place that, you know, other laws in place that prohibit these types of things from occurring anyway, so why are you doing it? But back to my original point, you know, desire for children is good, but the ends don't justify the means. And in this case, you're killing embryos, which are human persons, in order to get what you want, which is a child.
Right, exactly.
And
so,
as we talked about in our previous story too, 150 million children waiting to be adopted, right? There's
really
other
point.
options too.
Absolutely, good to remember.
All right.
Coming up after the break, we'll have a guest to discuss the controversial movie 50 Shades of Grey.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. In our next story, it's been called mommy porn and topped bestseller lists around the world. The erotic novel 50 Shades of Grey is now a movie, raising serious concerns about whether it glorifies sex abuse.
Interesting topic. I know several women who have read this book, and when it first came out, I was like, what is the deal with this book? Like, why are so many people interested, especially women, obviously, interested in this book? So I think, man, there's so much we could talk about with this.
Right, absolutely. And so just to give our viewers a little bit of background, this is a movie about a powerful, wealthy man who basically grooms this sort of younger, naive, college-age woman into engaging and agreeing to engage in a violent sexual relationship with him. And you know, he's very controlling, and he threatens her. He, you know, verbally attacks her and stalks her, tries to buy her off with very expensive presents, and then he physically hurts her, and it's sort of glorified and romanticized.
It's really awesome.
So there's been some major concerns raised about this, and I actually had the opportunity to speak with Heroic Media news director Jenny Uebbing about this campaign, sort of where it's coming from and where it's going. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Jenny, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
So 50 Shades of Grey, the book has sold over 100 million copies worldwide. Now it's a major motion picture. Are you going to go see this movie?
You know, not every story is worth doing intensive research on. So no, I do not think I will be seeing this. What we have going on here with 50 Shades, I think, is a really unique moment for us as a culture, because it has actually generated a decent amount of static on social media and in the regular media, because I think some people are really waking up to the reality that, you know, this is basically porn. It was like a pornographic romance novel that's been translated to the big screen. And there's actually something kind of weird about that. For the entire movie to center around that as the storyline, not as like an accessory plot or a subplot. So there's something powerful about taking this moment as a culture to kind of stop, check, look around, and ask ourselves, like, is this where we want to be? Is this what we want to be consuming for entertainment purposes?
I think that's a really good point, and I think people are realizing that because I haven't looked at the reviews recently, but right when it was first coming out, it had pretty bad ratings. The reviews, I know on Rotten Tomatoes, the review website, it had less than 50% approval. So I think there's something about this that people are going, wait a second, this is kind of weird. And then it's really interesting, you see opposition from these conservative Christian groups and from these more liberal feminist groups. It's very interesting, the groups that are opposing this.
Yeah, because there is like a unifying issue here, and it's that at the heart, these stories are like extremely misogynistic and dehumanizing. The female character is basically a battered woman in an abusive, unbalanced relationship, being dominated by this more powerful male figure. So yeah, that is something that people from varying ends of the political spectrum can kind of unite against and say, no, that's not what we want for women. Ironically, it's the female demographic that really had driven the sales for this when it was just the book trilogy. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was, you know, well approaching 3/4 of the copies they think were sold to women or purchased for women. And I've heard other experts identify this particular genre as basically like porn for women, like girl porn, mommy porn. Because you can download it on your Kindle, you can read it and talk about it with your girlfriends on Facebook, and in some way it normalizes in a complementary way to the way that visual porn has been normalized to a large extent for men. So, he's gonna have his fun and visit his dirty websites? Well, I'm gonna read this romantic, escapist, you know, piece of fiction and get a little thrill that way. But I mean, I haven't read the books. I'm not going to read the books, but a synopsis will show you clearly, like, there isn't romance to be had here. It's like sadistic, dominating, and abusive. And the thing that is the most strange is that in timing the release for Valentine's Day, when the movie came out, they were really trying to package it in a way that was consistent with that message, that this is like romance.
A love story.
And I think that backfired on them. I think when we see the numbers all coming out, that they're maybe not going to see a return on that investment as trying to sell that to couples as something nice they could do together.
Yeah, and there's now this campaign actually against this movie, and it's called $50, Not 50 Shades. And the idea is that instead of going and spending $50 on dinner and a movie for two, that instead you donate that $50 to a domestic violence, a battered women's shelter. Because, and one of the founders of this effort, she said that that's what's going to happen to the woman in this book. Realistically, that's how this ends. If she's lucky, she ends up in a women's shelter, and if she's unlucky, she ends up in a graveyard. So that's a pretty powerful statement.
It is powerful, and it's true. And what has perhaps been lost in translation with the extent to which we consume media as a culture is the reality that to bring this thing to production, you know, real actors had to get up in the morning and leave their real homes and their real families to go and film these really troubling and dark and really like evil and tormented scenes. And I saw an interview that the male lead would go home and shower for like 45 minutes after filming some of the more intense and sadistic sex scenes before he would touch his wife or his newborn. And my heart just broke, and it was confusing, but it was also like you can't do this with your body, even if it's just as an acting role. You can't do these things and not be affected like at a soul deep level.
Absolutely, and I think that's true for the people who are watching it, not just the people who are making it, but you're going and you're watching that, you're taking part. There's almost a participatory element in that.
Sure, movies increasingly so with the way that technology is moving. Movies are very interactive. It's like very much like a experience of consumption and participation. So that is, I think, one of the worrying concerns to a lot of people who work with abused and battered women, because to the extent that we enter into these situations, it normalizes this kind of relationship, this kind of violence. And it shouldn't be normalized. It should be shocking when a woman is in a situation like this, when she's being like abused or, you know, held for sexual favors. It's, you know, it is abuse.
Absolutely, it's not entertainment. Yeah.
So yeah, $50, not 50 Shades. Don't spend your money at dinner for two at a terrible chain restaurant and a $15 movie ticket.
Right.
Make a donation and then go get a nice bottle of wine and stay home.
Absolutely. Jenny, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing your insight.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
Wow, it's a great conversation that you guys had. I really like that, you know, they're coming. I like the idea, first of all, that you, instead of going to see the movie, donate to these domestic violence shelters and really kind of raise awareness also in today's digital age with these hashtags. $50, not 50 Shades, and then also 50 Shades is abuse, because that's really what it is. And I like kind of redirecting the focus and then also raising awareness for really what this is, and it treats women disrespectfully. And so hopefully this campaign will work out well and help these domestic violence shelters out. So.
Absolutely.
All right.
We'll have one more story after the break.
Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, in a recent general audience, Pope Francis reminds fathers to be more like Saint Joseph. I thought that was an interesting comment, and I thought it was really interesting how he kind of pulled from scripture and things to kind of tell fathers, highlight the importance of fathers really, and kind of guide people on how fathers should be, how fathers should act. And you know, me being a father, I think it especially hit me and kind of hit home recently with things that I'd kind of been discussing with my wife and everything. So what were your impressions?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I liked it. I liked, you know, he starts out with just the point. He says, every family needs a father. And just that point, it sounds so simple, but it really is, I think, very powerful in today's world, because we just have this world in which, you know, we see mothers and fathers as interchangeable, and, you know, two moms is just as good as a mom and a dad. And it's kind of
single mothers,
right?
All
and
over
so
the place.
and so that the idea that these are all kind of equal and that fathers are dispensable. And the truth is that's not accurate. The U.S. Census says that 43% of U.S. children live without their father. That's almost half of the population is growing up without a father. And for those children who are living without their father present, they're at higher risk of poverty, drug use, behavioral problems, becoming victims of abuse, engaging in criminal behavior, and suicide. So I think he's absolutely right in saying every family needs a father. That's a very simple statement, but it's very powerful. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, families that are intact certainly have their share of problems.
Absolutely.
But I totally agree. I think that most of the people that I know who have problems, criminal problems and things like that, they come from broken families. And I think that having a father figure in your life and a father there to you know, guide you, teach you, I think is very, very important for society. So I think one of the things that stood out to me the most was he was talking about the role of parents. And he was saying that, you know, you need to teach with gentleness and patience and firmness and encouragement. And that really hits home for me, because you really need to be patient when you're a parent. And it's amazing. Like, my wife and I were just talking about this, I think, yesterday, and just how, you know, your little 3 or 4 year old, 2-year-old can just make you furious. Like, you never would imagine that a little person can make you so mad. But, you know, they just don't know a lot of times, and it's just part of a phase, and you just need to remain patient and be gentle with them, and that's really difficult. So I'm really glad that Pope Francis hit on that, because that's kind of, I literally just had a conversation about that, because you know, when you lose your temper or, you know, you're not gentle, it sends a message, and your kids learn so much from you. It's huge. It's amazing. So
that's a really good point. And the Pope talks about the importance of just being there, and as you say, the witness, not necessarily from what you're doing or saying, but just your presence there. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting when he's listing the characteristics of a good father. The, you know, be firm but gentle, be encouraging, those kind of things. Yeah. The first thing that he says is closeness. Just be there. And he says to be a good father in the first place is to be present in the family, sharing the joys and sorrows with one's wife, accompanying one's children as they grow. Right. So, and I think that, you know, probably the task of fatherhood is overwhelming in today's world. There's so many dangers and so many evils that you want to protect your children from, and there's certainly no how-to manual when you have a kid. But I think that's so encouraging that just this message that just be with your kids, just be there, and pray for the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Pray to Saint Joseph.
Absolutely.
And really trust in God's grace to help you be a good father and to help you guide your children.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that there's no manual, because that was one of my points too. And when my wife and I were chatting yesterday, is that there's no user's manual for this. You're kind of learning on the job, and you figure these things out as you go. And like you said, I agree 100%. It's so important to pray together. Ask for the intercession of Saint Joseph, ask for guidance, and when you ask something of God, God will give it to you, right? It might not be in the exact way that you envision it coming to you, but He will give you what you need. And so, yeah, I think that's totally, definitely key. And I liked also that he said, you have to discipline your own heart first. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you can't be being a good influence and teaching your kids the right things if you don't change yourself first, because it always starts there and then kind of radiates out, right? And if you don't believe things in your own heart, then you're probably not going to act them out, right?
That's a very good point.
So I think it's important to really start there and then move your way out, like I think he was hinting at. That's what I got out of it.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And another thing that he says is that a characteristic of a good father is being able to guide the child through disappointment. And I think that's important because you're not going to be a perfect parent. No one is. And this isn't a perfect world. So you can't have these unrealistic expectations of perfection. There are going to be difficulties. Your child is going to sin. Your child is going to fall. And so being able to guide them when they get discouraged, when they fall, when they sin, is a very, very huge part of that. And to just have those realistic expectations and say, I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to be realistic about this, and I'm going to trust in God because I can't do it by myself.
Absolutely, and it goes back to the whole setting an example. When you have a failure, your children need to see you be able to handle that failure and deal with it, in stride.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's really important because life, there's going to be plenty of failures, and you need to be able to handle the ups and the downs of life to have a stable life, really. And having a mother and a father there, of course, helps that out immensely.
Absolutely.
So. All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.